Has the market changed its mind about what the Fed may do next?
We have got to get inflation behind us. I wish there were a painless way to do that. There isn't.
Think of that number, and maybe more importantly, what do you think the Fed's going to do, and therefore what your equity is going to do?
I've been saying over and over again to my colleagues here that he wants your portfolio down so that you won't be able to spend as much.
Morning and welcome to Financial Stockholm. I'm Christopher Crystal, and today is Monday, October 24th. And these are our thoughts about the Swedish market, what we're seeing, and how we would interpret them. So last week, the big event was, of course, our government. We have a new government, a new prime minister, and there's a lot of talk about whether Sweden's going right wing or if Sweden will give up on certain things that they've been promoting in the past on ESG or not. And there's been some confusing statements from different party members, and I think we'll go through that in a second. But right now on a Monday, there hasn't been much out in terms of corporate news in Sweden. So there's a lot of focus on the politics, and there's a lot of focus on our social life and norms here in Sweden and what's going on. So we've had a spat of violence where we're the number one in terms of gang violence, and we have achieved the rank of number one in overdose deaths. And this is really a destruction of our Swedish society. And so there's been a lot of change that's been occurring, and the new government wants to address these things. But on top of that, we have other issues going on concerning our energy. And so like our energy independence, we had the Nord Stream 1 and 2, which blew up in our economic zone within the Baltic Sea. And Sweden was going to investigate, and then was not going to investigate with Denmark and Germany, and was going to keep everything confidential. So of course you get a lot of speculation on why would Sweden keep it confidential, and you can draw your own conclusions there. Germany this weekend has also come to the same conclusion, that they are going to keep their investigation confidential. So they know who did it, or they have the indication of who did it, but they're keeping it confidential. So this doesn't help us with the situation of the war in Ukraine. We see increased attacks. We see that Putin is destroying the infrastructure to make the people suffer, and is hitting civilian targets. And the Ukraine is equivocating. They're doing the same thing. You did have the Russian defense minister ringing around or calling around to the NATO defense ministries and the American defense minister to say that Ukraine would stage a false flag with a dirty bomb, and then you've also had Zelensky saying these things. So really, we're at a point of peak escalation. You had a paper in the United States talking about the 101st Airborne is ready to go and about to engage, and was doing live fire drills in Europe, Eastern Europe, on the borders. And so we're really at a dark point, and we could get to a nuclear war very quickly, which is not good, of course. And would certainly, and this is where we haven't seen any real pushback, is from the ESG crowd, is because environmentally, this would be the greatest disaster we could ever face. And so if you're worried about climate change, you should certainly be worried about a nuclear war, because that would be the worst thing that could happen. But if we go back to looking at the government in Sweden, we had a new prime minister take the party and take the government. And what that means is that it was the Moderat Party, or Moderaterna, and then you had the Liberalerna Party, the Liberal Party, and which is tied more to an economic thesis as opposed to a what other people may look upon as liberal. And then it's also the Christian Democrat Party. There was the party that gained the second most amount of votes in Sweden is called the Swedish Demokraterna, and they are not part of the government, so they don't sit in the parliament with the or they can have parliamentary seats within a Riksdag or not, or how would they cooperate, and could they sabotage all the plans of this coming government because they hold a great amount of votes. They had a lot of seats placed, and so while they're not in the government, they had to work out an agreement. And because we're a pragmatic culture here in Sweden, they came up with what's called the Tidöavtal, and that means the Tidö, which is the fort or the manner where they came to the agreement on how to work together and how to work it out. So we still see communication in Sweden, even where people say they're not going to work with them. And you do have some people within the Moderraterna Party saying we're not going to work with them at all. You have some people in the Liberal Party saying we're not going to work with them at all. You have the same within the Christian Democrat, and you also have some in the Swedish Demokraterna who are adverse to working with other people. So you had to come to an agreement, and that's called the Tidöavtal, and that was agreed to, so we can have a cohesive government that can rule and come together on how to make the laws and what to do and how to get the country better. Because economically, we're starting to suffer. The high energy price and the household cost is weighing on consumers. There's a question of how much savings that the consumers have in order to withstand these increased energy costs. And we're looking at a very, very dark time. We now have predictions that we'll have a very cold winter, and this is opposite of what we had before, where it was going to be a mild winter. We do see that household consumption of electricity dropped in September by 18%, and that's for households, only houses. That doesn't include the apartments. And that means that many people in Sweden have switched over to their fireplace wood burning. So there go our environmental goals of low carbon production. And really what's important there is the particulate products that come out of burning wood going up into the atmosphere, and everybody gets to breathe. And if you look into your climate research, you know that that's one of the leading causes of death in the world, is people breathing bad air. So the agreement came into place, and it proposes how the parties will work together. And it's a 62-page agreement that is worth reading. I don't know how many people in the government have actually read it, other than those that wrote it. And I don't know how many people that are criticizing it have actually read it. And I don't know how many of the journalists have actually read it. But the environmental goals stay roughly in place, or stay in place. The Moderraterna Party has been working well with the European Union. In fact, Ulf Kristersson has attended the World Economic Forum on different occasions and been in part of different working groups. So there is no doubt that they will want to work with Europe, rather than say like how Italy may or may not work with Europe, or like how the UK left the European Union. And so we look to have a cohesive government which will work with Europe and will be working together with the world, so to speak. And what that means is you have a commitment to the environmental policy, you have a commitment to the EU laws, and you have a commitment to the society being better in Sweden. And so if you look at the statements that was given out, or were given out in the agreement, one of the first is talking about how the Swedish society is suffering from this wave of crime. And as I mentioned, we're leading in shootings, and we're leading in overdose deaths. The society is breaking down. And so there has to be a change, and what would be done to affect this change. And so you had the campaigns from the parties that won talking about increased police and having increased police protection. Now, some of this will mean that the Swedish citizen will be giving up rights, like the police will be able to search your vehicle when they stop you, which was not included in the previous policies. It means a law change has to be put in place. And it also means that there'll be a hardening of criminal penalties as a result of breaking the law, where you had criminals getting out earlier. And this will look specifically at violent crimes. It'll look at it'll look specifically at drug crimes, and it'll look specifically at sex abuse crimes. And it also will mean that there will be a greater amount of police, and there will be a significant amount of rule changes. And it will also mean that the migration law in Sweden is changed, where previously we were taking in 5,000 a year, and now we will go to the European minimum of 900 per year. And then there will be a evaluation of each individual coming in. There could be DNA analysis to test to see if this individual is the person they say. There will not be a free turnover of that person to just a family, especially if the family was involved in previous criminality. And so there will be a lot of little changes in Sweden, but What does that mean for the international investor? Not as much. It does mean, though, that there will be changes for us. And then we also, the agreement states that the Swedish economy is in a bad trend right now, and we're looking at a recession. And then we're looking at these increased household costs. And most of this, as an economy, is tied to energy, and energy correlation to the market is one. You have to have a secure energy program. And previously, when the grid was done, the distribution through the power networks has been a little bit more difficult. And the ability for the consumer to find a decent electricity price wasn't an issue when the electricity was low, but now it's become a foremost concern for most households. And so there will have to be changes there. And part of this was done in the consolidation of a ministry. We previously had an environmental ministry, and now we will have a business, so an enterprise, and environment industry. So they combine the two into one, because a lot of your business in Sweden is controlled by different departments, and you have to apply to different departments in order to conduct your business. And as a result, it makes it very difficult for the small business owner or even a large conglomerate business owner to get things through and understand what they have to do and what they have to file. So that was a second part to this agreement, is making it easier for businesses and to have less bureaucracy. So you could go to one industry and one ministry and get your answer. There will be a possible lowering of taxes. There may even be some subsidies from the government. So like there is a 400 billion given over to nuclear. And what that will mean is that you can actually build new nuclear plants. You have to get the environmental laws changed for that, but as they're consolidated into one industry, it should be easier. Now, the previous administration did have an individual, Kaimar, and I can't remember his last name, but he was amenable to nuclear. And when he was asked about SMRs, because small modular reactors were not previously allowed in Sweden, he was amenable to it, but he put it over to the incoming government. He said in July, this is a question that should be answered by the incoming government. Now, the question was asked by a Swedish Democrat, Bjorn Söder, who has been pushing for nuclear, increased nuclear. The environmental party in Sweden, the Miljöpartiet Party, had said no to this, and that the environmental laws did not allow for increased nuclear. And it also did not allow for use of closed down nuclear plants to have them restarted or have them as sites for small modular reactors. So you have about 10 different sites in Sweden which would allow for this. And so if you want to secure a independent energy and secure energy, so we're not using Russian gas or using gas, which is a fossil fuel, then you would need to have a solution, as windmills and solar can only account for about 15% of our energy need. And as we're in a very dark time period now, and we're going to get worse, we're going to get to about 4 hours of daylight very soon. You will not have the availability of solar as a power generation, and wind can be sporadic. And so they're not actually on a reliable basis. So you need a reliable energy source, and that would be nuclear, to operate at the 50 hertz needed for the European network. And so with the hurdle cleared on regulation, or potential hurdle cleared on regulation, this would be a positive. And I'll get into this more on the nuclear here in a second. But if we switch again over to our, if we think purely in terms of energy and the climate goals, it points to nuclear. And then if you look at the continuation to Sweden entering into NATO, and our prime minister is down in Turkey arranging a meeting with Erdogan, and there are some negotiations there to work out on how Sweden would enter into this. That would mean our defense budget, this was one of the promises in the Tidöavtal, our defense budget would go up to 2%, okay? And we're down around 1.3%. So that's a dramatic increase in spending. And then to be a part of NATO, you have to spend 2% of your GDP. So we would go from 1.3 in our defense spending of GDP up to 2, and then up to 4. So that's going to require some changes as well. And that goes back to the original or first point about improving our Swedish society which will be routing out a certain amount of fraud and eliminating some of the criminality associated with it, or hopefully all of the criminality. So, but if we go back to the nuclear now, Sweden had, when I first came to Sweden 20 years ago, we had a much higher percentage of our energy coming from nuclear. Now we have a certain amount of hydro energy, and Uniper from Germany is involved in that, as well as our Oskarshamn nuclear plant, but it's owned by Germany now, or not its own, but Uniper is owned by Germany, and Uniper has small ownership stake in Oskarshamn, and they are against nuclear, and they've been closing down their nuclear plants, although they're waiting now because of the energy crisis. Sweden is looking to improve, or at least the Swedish Democrats and the Moderaterna have been talking more about nuclear. And so how would we do this? Well, we could reactivate, okay? We could actually put SMRs on site where we already have nuclear reactors or had nuclear reactors that were closed. And so if you think about who is in charge of that, it would be Vattenfall. And Vattenfall was written into the Tidöavtal that they would have a board supervisory from the government, okay? So the Vattenfall, which is our major producer here in Sweden, has been building our nuclear and been running our nuclear and had the fuel rods from Westinghouse. And Westinghouse signed the agreement this past week that they would continue to supply. So we're secure in our uranium and our fuel rods and the disposal of these rods when they're out of energy. And we'll have that continuing by Westinghouse. We have that commitment. However, we would also look at potentially SMRs. SMRs, small modular reactors, have not been allowed by the Swedish environmental laws before. And now we have a strong likelihood that it will be, because Vattenfall filed in July to have a survey done for the environmental survey of including SMRs at their Ringhole 1 and Ringhole 2 sites. So that means you could have 2 SMRs, potentially 4 or more, to supply the power that those sites would no longer be supplying or no longer supply since they were closed down. And the agreement also allows you to restart. It allows you to build new, and it allows you to use SMRs according to the agreement. These are their goals. They're not in place yet, but these are the goals. And then what does that mean? Well, it means that you would see a SMR-friendly approach. You would see a change in the environmental law, which is now controlled by the enterprise and environment to allow this. And then you would see a potential backing financially. You already have the companies because, and then also if the government forces a shutdown of a plant, then the plant can demand damages, or the owner of the plant can demand damages from the government for the loss of revenue. So, which would mean that if the voters change and vote in a party that's anti-nuclear, well, then it would also be at their cost, okay? Because then that refunding of money would come through taxpayer money, right? So it puts it in a new position, and it puts it in an interesting position. And then, so in the past, when you had somebody like Kajsa Formanbar, who was part of the Social Democrat Party, who was pro-nuclear, and that means you do have more in the Social Democrat Party who would be for it, you see a potential that this will come through. And the companies in Sweden currently are not really getting any sort of real benefit, although they're the real leaders in the green movement. So that's, again, another indication that you will have no change in the Swedish environmental policy, and we're not going to run into some sort of oil polluting state or air polluting state that we could be, and that some are saying we would become. So you have also the business industry leader. The former AstraZeneca head, Jan-Olof Jacka, has said that the government is working well with the businesses, and businesses are the leader in the green. And then you have this potential for the SMR coming. And if you take a look in the background, you see that Bill Gates, who commented recently about how the severing of the Nord Stream pipeline is an incredible opportunity. And what does that mean? Well, he runs a company called TerraPower, and that's working in Wyoming. And they've done their surveys now, and they should start construction by 2023, 2024 of this SMR plant in Cheyenne, Wyoming. And then you have another company called Breakthrough Energy, which is also founded by Bill Gates, which is very favorable to SMRs. So you have one of the leading financial figures who's a key figure at COP26 and a key figure over at the World Economic Forum saying, go SMR. And it wouldn't be hard to see somebody like that coming into Sweden saying, hey, we have this wonderful product you could use. And then you also have a number of companies here in Europe that would also be proponents of an SMR technology. One of those would be somebody like Nuclear, that's they're over in the US. You do have Rolls-Royce down in England. You have other countries promoting companies like, so you have GE Hitachi, nuclear energy, you have Westinghouse, you even have a Danish company called Seaboard, and they focus more on the barges power solution, where you put all the nuclear power on a barge, just like you do with a nuclear sub or a aircraft carrier, and then you have it off the shore, and then they're offering a solution that I think is a natrium, and would have less chance to pollute the sea if there was a leak. At least that's according to what they say. Now, other countries in Europe are already exploring this, and other countries around the world. So like South Africa, you have Romania, you have Estonia, you have Latvia, you have the Czech Republic. So these are all proposed in these different countries, involving some of these different countries. And I said nuclear before, I meant NuScale. The company in the US doing the SMR would be somebody like NuScale. But when you have this much financial backing and acceptance of it, and then importantly, the acceptance here in Sweden, you did have an interview where Jakob Wallenberg said that he would support SMR if it was part of the government policy. So we have everything lined up where you should be looking at nuclear, and that could be our solution for an energy solution. And so when I say that's what you should be looking at, that's what we should be looking at in Sweden, is a general opinion of the incoming government and current government. So that's why I talk about it, and that's why I mention it. I've included notes and I've included links where you can feel free to look at the information. And with that, we'll probably have more focus on the incoming government, because the outgoing government wants to say that they're in array or disarray, and how can you trust what's going on? But and our new policies have to be implemented in the Riksdag, in our parliament, and so we'll see what happens next. But that's it for today, and I want to wish you a great day, and good luck, and we'll talk to you tomorrow. Thank you very much. Bye.